Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Jensen and other classmates if you're watching this. So I'm Denielle, if you can't see me. And the topic I chose, I called it Differentiated Education in the Music Studio. Basically, last quarter I took a class in CESP called Teaching Students with Exceptional Needs. I learned about students and the common behaviors of people or students with emotional behavioral disorders, intellectual disabilities, physical and mental handicaps, and visual and oral disabilities, just a whole wide range of things. And basically I learned about how to be a teacher in a situation where students with a wide range of these, a wide possible range of these problems could be in my classroom and how to adapt my teaching for all of them at the same time. I found it very eye-opening, especially since we come in contact with people like this every day. We have issues like this, and sometimes we may not be diagnosed with it or anything, but we all have issues. We just may not recognize them. But learning specifically how to be a better teacher and more effective teacher because these people exist, and you want to make sure and reach everyone. Part of the reason I feel like I was inspired to choose this topic is because in the music studio, and this is different than, I would say, a differentiated classroom where everybody is in the same classroom. In a studio, a teacher works one-on-one with a student at a time. So that is much better and more ideal. Definitely not something that most people have the privilege to have. But I think that we should, even teachers in that situation, should still be mindful of this, differentiating their teaching style for students who are different. In the music studio, I feel most of the experiences I have had as a cellist is that a lot of studios, it seems more like the students adapt to the teacher instead of the teacher adapting to the student. In education, a lot of teachers are being hounded about making themselves flexible and being this for one person and another for another person, and they're constantly being told to be totally like a chameleon. And I feel like that's the opposite. When I get to seeing private music studios, most of the students are constantly trying to figure their teacher out, what their teacher meant, and how to please their teacher, which I think is, in some ways, it's a good skill to get, learning how to work with people who may not change very easily. But at the same time, I feel like that is ineffective, and a teacher who's allowing that to happen is not being specifically the most effective teacher. So I think as a possible future music educator, and not necessarily in a school system, I want to learn how to be a teacher who adapts to the students, finds out what the students' learning styles and what is the most effective way to teach them. I think that's very important to me in reaching people, and especially since I care mostly about teaching people who may not have easy access to things like private music lessons. They need to know that their basic needs are being met. Their basic needs of communication, relationship, things like that. Just someone who cares about what they care about, simply. And it's not just about doing what the teacher says. So mainly what I've learned in this class is that as a teacher, I should put the students first and find out what their learning style is and work mostly with that. Yes, I want to expand on the students' learning styles, but I should be mindful that the most effective way is what they prefer, and so I should use that most. It doesn't matter how much I want to stretch their imaginations. And I should do that as a teacher, but I shouldn't neglect what works best for them. Adapting, it could include things like working with students who have autism. That could be on any place on the spectrum. And it could be, learning that with students with autism, some of them have different levels of problems with distraction. Some people who have autism, they hear everything. They hear sounds that we do not even hear. and those things bother them. And so there's certain situations that would really bother them, which we don't find a problem. So if I'm in a room where there's like a slight buzzing, like if the light bulb is making a sound, and to me, I don't care about that. But the student, like obviously it's really ticking him off and he can't concentrate on the lesson, I need to be mindful of changing that situation for him as a teacher. Or if he's in an ensemble and he can't sit in a place where there's going to be like noise behind him, like a huge brass instrument like blowing air at him, you have to be mindful of that as a teacher as well. Specifically, also, I have worked with a student who has autism and he plays the cello, and I learned that sometimes I have to repeat myself a lot, and it's not necessarily like the student's ignoring me, it's just sometimes they need a lot of reminders, and learning certain things like that is not necessarily like the student is being disrespectful. You have to adapt to what needs they have, and sometimes they just need someone to remind them a few times before they get how important things are. Another adaptation, some students, they already know when they're wrong, and it's not about constantly telling them, hey, fix that, or you did that wrong. Sometimes if I just sit back and watch a student in a lesson, they're playing through a piece and they mess up, I don't have to say anything, and it's more effective for me to be silent and just kind of wait, and they figure out what they did wrong, and that works best for them. Because for that same student, if I was to be like, hey, that's wrong, they wouldn't feel like fixing it. Or they wouldn't feel like caring to listen to what they're doing and fixing it when they practice. So that's like a couple experiences. I guess one more experience, I know I'm running over time. I have a piano student. When he first started playing piano or taking piano lessons with me, it was kind of confusing to me because in the lessons he would sight read everything perfectly. He'd do the theory activities perfectly. But whenever I assigned him something to practice or finish at home, he never did it. I would assign him like 3 or 4 things to do over a week. So one time I was talking to his dad about this and explaining to him, I would give him work and he wasn't finishing it. Do you know what's going on with that? And he told me that his son has a certain learning disability, and this goes for him in school as well. And so he has to work with special aid to get work done. And he said mainly just focus on one thing at a time with him. Focus on one task and he'll get that done. And I had to work with that. So the first few weeks after that, I would give him one piece and we'd focus on that one piece, and he'd come back and he'd have it prepared. And I figured out that was the way to work with him, and at least to build on that. And now at this point, I can give him 2 to 3 pieces, and he'll come back with having worked on it. Because the first time I was throwing so many things at him at the same time, and he was pretty much ignoring all of it. So that's just a couple examples of adaptation. And that's kind of my research method for this. I don't think that it's enough to read. There's so much out there to read. Actually, I gave a few resources. There's the textbook I used, Human Exceptionality, School, Community, and Family by Hardman, Drew, and Egan. There's also the Music Educators Journal, which is online. They have tons of articles. And the Music Therapy Association. They have a lot of information about people with different disorders and disabilities and what you can do as a teacher to work with them, or even as a musician. Those I think are very important to check out, but I also think it's very valuable to work with people who are very different from you face to face. There's nothing like learning that way. So getting experience, even if it's one-on-one, talking to them, just observing them, being with them is a totally different learning experience than reading about them in a book. Lastly, my closing question, I guess, it would be specific to physical disabilities. How would I, as a cello teacher, work with someone who has I would say specifically an oral handicap? They can't really hear very well. There's some other handicaps where teachers figure their way around, but what about a student who can't really hear how in tune they are? They probably can't hear certain sounds they're making, and they can't hear well enough to refine their sound. So how I can, as a teacher, can work with a student like that in the most effective way? I think everyone has the right to play the cello, so I don't think it's my job to turn anyone down. But I do want to know how exactly would I give my best advice to someone who has a disability like that. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this is exactly what you were looking for in the assignment. Have a great summer.